awareness helps in other areas too, just with our budgets, right? You can't, if you're having trouble spending your money, the first step is just to be aware of where your money goes. If at the end of the week or month the bank account is always way lower than you thought, the first step to making better financial choices is awareness. And this is what the psalm is doing. He's saying, let's be aware of what God is doing in the world. The psalmist says, I'm going to intentionally use this time to make myself aware of what's happening in the grand scheme of things. So first he's recounting the deeds of the Lord, and he's waking up to the story of God. The psalmist doesn't recount anybody else's deeds, he recounts God's. He's focusing his entire thought process on God. Because the truth is, there's this huge story that's going on. This huge, cosmic, infinitely important story. And the story's main character is God. And in fact, the scriptures tell us that everything from our lives to the universe to every creature on earth was created for God and by God. And so when we make choices in light of the fact that the world does not and should not revolve around us, but it does revolve around God, those choices go an entirely different direction. And the psalmist is making himself aware of that this huge story is going on, and it's not about him. And I think many of us are like, yeah, Chet, that's fine. I don't want the world to revolve around me, or maybe I do want it, but I realize it's not going to. And I know we think that, and we might not all want the world to revolve around us, but we want our families to, right? We want our spouse to. We want the people at work to. We want all our relationships to. We want the people at the grocery store, when we're there, just clear the aisles and let me get through. I'm really important and I got places to be, right? So we might not want the world to, but we want a lot of other things too. And so we make choices out of self-centeredness and a wrong sense of self-importance. And the psalmist says, I'm going to remind myself that there's a big story going on, and it's not all about me. This kind of struck me in a funny way this week. You ever notice when people doodle? When people doodle, what do they always write? Their name, right? Like they haven't heard it or seen it enough, The very best word I can think to write, Chet Beetler. It's a weird name, let's be honest. But I write it, and I make stars and get the finger paints out. Is it possible that every one of us is more preoccupied with ourselves than we would like to think? And that recounting the wonderful deeds of the Lord could bring some grounding and humility to the choices that we make and to how we treat people. You see, we basically have a choice here. We can either be part of this cosmic story of infinite importance and have a lesser role, or we can just have a starring role in some itty-bitty basement production that really isn't important and forgettable. And some of us would rather have a starring role in this small, unimportant story than be part of this tremendous story but have a lesser role. And we can do that. We can choose to not recount the deeds of the Lord and not wake up to the story. But when we do that, it comes at a great price. I read a terrible article this week about a Korean couple in South Korea who had this obsession with one of those computer games that simulate real life. Like The Sims is one of those. They didn't say which game it was, but they would spend 4 to 6 hours a day playing this game in an internet cafe. Now the problem with that, there's a lot of them, but the big problem was that they had a little baby girl. And so they neglected her so much that she died of malnutrition. And it's absolutely stunning. Here they are, they're playing real life when they could be living real life. And it came at the cost of life. And I think for many of us, that choice is before us. God's saying, yeah, you can have a starring role, in this little production that's all about you. And that doesn't really matter, but you're going to do it at the loss of your life, of what you were created to do and who you were created to be. And the cost is going to be great. So the psalmist says, I'm going to recount the deeds of the Lord. I'm going to remember it's about Him. He's the main character, and I'm here to be a supporting role, to point people's attention towards Him, to highlight and to make Him shine, and not use everything to make me shine. It's awareness. The second kind of awareness here is that notice that the focus here is on the main character. God's the one that's done the wonderful things. He's doing them in the present, and He'll do them in the future. And the psalmist has a perspective on God that sometimes we lack. He sees God as one who's active in history and in present doing great work. And sometimes in our lives we focus on everything God has not done or everything we think God should have done. And we tend to get bent out of shape when God doesn't take our advice or act according to our direction. And so the environment from which our choices are made is an environment that lacks hope, that lacks faith, that lacks courage. Because it's a place where we see the world that it just continues to degenerate and to degenerate, and our fears become realized, and the best days are behind us.